All right, good morning. So to begin, I'd like to ask you all to close your eyes. Imagine with me. I want you to imagine that you're hiking. It's dark, maybe 3, 4 in the morning, and you're completely alone. To say that you're exhausted would be an understatement. So you've been traveling for several days, going from bus station to bus station, one hitchhike ride after the next. And once you finally made it to your destination, you learned that where you were going to stay could no longer host you. So here you are, sleep-deprived, completely alone, and on the side of a mountain. With nowhere else to go, you decide to continue. And after each painstaking step, doubt starts to creep in. You start to ask yourself questions like, what am I doing? Was this all a mistake? And why am I here? But you keep going. After what seems like an eternity, you start to notice the ground under your feet begins to level. And you realize you made it to the top. So with what little energy you have left, you throw off your bag and you crash to the ground. As you sit there, trying to catch your breath, the most incredible thing happens. You see the darkest night of your life begins to break and turn into one of the most incredible mornings. It starts slowly at first. You start to hear the birds chirping off in the distance, and you breathe. A couple minutes later, you start to notice the rolling hills around you, and you breathe. And then a few minutes after that, the most incredible cityscape you've ever seen presents itself out of the darkness. And as you sit there, completely alone and exhausted, you realize that this place and this time is precisely where you were meant to be. Okay, open your eyes. Now, I'm excited to say that this story is not just a story. In fact, this is what happened to me a couple years back when I got the opportunity to travel through Europe. The place that I was at was a little formation called Arthur's Seat, just outside of Edinburgh, Scotland. And I brought a couple pictures so that you can get an idea of just how incredible Scotland is. So this is Edinburgh. It's pretty incredible, isn't it? It's kind of like a fairy tale. In fact, Scotland is so magical that their national animal is the unicorn. There's another picture. Now, this is one of the many stories that I like to tell of my travels. But when I tell them, I usually get the same responses. People say, man, Cody, I wish I could do that. But, and then they start to list off reasons they feel like they can't. Either school or work, family obligations, finances. And to that, I always give the same response. I say, well, if I could do it, anyone can. And I don't say that to be trite or dismissive, but because I honestly believe that if you could handpick one of the least likely people to live fearlessly or adventurously, that it would be me. So this is me. And as the pastel colors and the mullet might make you believe, this was taken in the early 90s. I was probably 3 years old, and what you need to know is that I was born into a broken home. My family, we struggled with all sorts of things. Financial difficulties, drug and alcohol addiction, and all the things that go along with that. We were even left homeless at one point following a strand of hurricanes. And to top it all off, I was born with a disability. The disability is known as cerebral palsy. And if you look closely at the screen, you can see little pieces of fabric on my legs, attaching leg braces to me that I had to wear my entire childhood. Now, I do have to say that I was pretty lucky and that my diagnosis was not as severe as it could have been. And through the help of several doctors, half a dozen surgeries, and countless hours of physical therapy, I was able to have most of my symptoms treated. But there is something that physical therapy and surgeries can't fix, and that's the emotional baggage that accompanies something like this. You see, I've always been a pretty ambitious child. Some might say a dreamer. But from a young age, I knew I was different. And I got the impression that somehow my dreams weren't meant for me, that they were reserved for someone else, someone who had more money or was from a better situation. Definitely not a kid from a broken home with a broken body. And the more that I live, the more I realize that this isn't something that's specific to my story, that we've all been there, that we've all been in places where we would look around and feel insignificant or that we weren't capable of reaching our goals. Luckily for me, though, I'm extremely stubborn, and I decided that I didn't want to let society dictate my ability. So I set out to live adventurously and fearlessly. And what I found along the way was that living adventurously has very little to do with your actual circumstance and everything to do with your perspective. So that's what I'm here to talk with you about today. 4 things that I do on a daily basis to help me shift my perspective to live adventurously and fearlessly, and the hope that you'll be able to take those and do the same. So the first step is to set goals and write them down. So when it comes to setting goals, I want you to take some time to yourself, figure out who it is that you want to be, what you want to do, and what you want to accomplish. I'm not asking you to think about what your parents want you to do, what your friends want you to do, or what society says you should do, but what do you want to do? And then after you figure that out, write it down. See, writing it down is going to take that idea and make it tangible. It's going to give it some meat. And once it's in a physical form, it's easier to manage. And once you write it down, you're less likely to forget it as well. Now, this can look different for everyone. And for me, it takes shape in the form of a bucket list. And when it comes to my bucket list, I write down absolutely anything that I think I might want to try. And then a couple times a month, I'll break out my bucket list, read through, and pick a new goal that I want to work towards. Now, these goals can be anything. They can be things like going to college, skydiving, or going on a road trip and seeing famous monuments, or maybe backpacking Europe. Or they can be seemingly less significant things like learning to ride a unicycle. So the second thing is to shake up your routine. So in my opinion, routine is the killer of spontaneity. But we're creatures of habit, so we fall into routine. We do the same thing day after day. We go to work or school. We come home. We see the same friends. We eat the same foods. We watch the same shows. And then we get bored. And after we get bored, we look around, and we see people who are living outside of routine, and we get jealous. But what we don't realize is those people have made the conscious decision to live outside of routine. Now, I'm not asking you to quit your job or quit school and move across the country, okay? It's not what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to start small. Do things like drive a new way to work, go to a new restaurant, try new food, maybe hang out with those friends that you keep saying you'll get coffee with, but you never see. And then once you start doing that, it'll snowball, and it'll get easier and easier and easier to try new things. The third is to learn to say yes. Now, saying yes is single-handedly the most impactful thing for me when it comes to living adventurously. You see, the more you say yes, the more people are going to perceive you as someone who's open to new experiences. And the more that they perceive you as such, the more they're going to ask you to do new things. A perfect example of this happened about a year ago. I was sitting in my office, and my phone buzzed. It was a friend who had messaged me that I hadn't seen in a while, asking me if I wanted to take part in what she called a quintessential Nebraskan experience. Of course, I said yes. And I found myself on the way to the smallest town I've ever seen. And when I got there, I realized I'd been invited to the social event of the season. People from all over the state and several others came together to help this family with their annual cattle branding. And I got to spend the day wrestling cows and learning how Nebraska ranchers and farmers lived. And to date, it is one of my best memories of Nebraska. I know, right? But that would not have happened if I hadn't first said yes. So lastly, is to tell your stories. So the more you tell your stories, the more you're going to remind yourself of some of the incredible things that you've done. And as you do that, it's going to encourage you to continue to live fearlessly and adventurously. Second, when you tell your stories, you're going to inspire others to live in a manner that is similar to that. And it kind of brings everything full circle. So to close, I want to reiterate one point, that living adventurously and fearlessly has very little to do with your actual circumstances and everything to do with shifting your perspective. And once you shift your perspective, you'll find adventure everywhere. Thank you.